park. So that's what it remains today. Now, prior to 1870, there wasn't a whole lot going on here in the lake. Just basically a little hunting and fishing village for people from all across the areas. It was in 1870, though, that we saw the first ever summer home put up here on the lake. Just behind this white boat right here, you see a beautiful tan home. That tan home was built in 2004, so relatively new for this part of it, about 2 decades old. They tore down the old Maple Lawn estate, as it was known. Maple Lawn was built in 1870. It sat on the hillside where that tan home now sits today. That home sat here for 134 years, and it's special because it was the first ever summer home, or summer mansion, I should say, ever built on the lake. Give you an idea of how large that property was. It was actually bigger than the tan home that sits there today. That gray home behind it with the black roof, kind of going on a view now for some of us, that was the second home for the estate. They built that just for the overflow of guests and servants for the main home. Now after that, we get into a group of smaller homes. Definitely not small compared to a lot of the homes you'll see around the area, but small for this stretch of the lake. This is known as the Geneva Manor subdivision. It sits on 37 acres of the former Levi Leiter estate. Levi Leiter's estate was known as Linden Lodge. It would have stood behind this little beach and park area that we're passing right now, but unfortunately their home was torn down in 1937. Developers realized that they could buy one of these massive estates, sell it off, break it into little pieces, and would make a whole lot more money off it than they did with those one large properties. Now, kind of a neat thing about the Geneva Manor subdivision is that all homes are required to have a different style or features. Every single one of these homes is unique. You go throughout the shoreline here or anywhere throughout the subdivision, every single home will have its own unique features. So kind of a nice way to make your subdivision stand out a little bit. Pier 20 right there is also the first non-white pier that we'll have. Pier 20 is painted that brown color. The main reason for painting your pier white is just a little bit cooler on the feet. So on a hot summer day when the sun's beating down on it, you don't burn the bottom of your feet off kind of walking down to the end of your pier. Also, the white paint basically matches any home behind it. Very easier to match with the colors there. And also we have these volunteer painters here at Blake that like to sit on those posts all day. The seagulls sit on them and chew on the piers. Seagulls paint those white so the park covers up what they do. Behind these couple of boats, you'll see a beautiful white boathouse. It's one of the few remaining structures in the state known as Snug Harbor. Snug Harbor was built in 1881 for George and Mary Sturgis. They're the ones that owned all of Library Park for a number of years. George and Mary Sturgis had 9 children, so that little summer cottage that they had back in Library Park, their family just sort of outgrew it. So they came up to this side of the lake.
Thank you guys. Salamat.
Unfortunately, the home is no longer there. It burned down in 1857. But 10 years prior to that,
dito kami sa Geneva Lake sa Wisconsin.
As Covenant Harbor Bible Camp, owned and operated by the Evangelical Covenant Churches of America. This camp is still in operation today.
Dito daw yung mga place ng mga mayayaman. Dito sa Chicago. May mga kanya-kanya silang yate na nakaparking sa mga bahay-bahay nila. Ayan.
Starting with Pier 32, we'll see the Geneva Bay Estates. It's the last group of homes within the city limits of Lake Geneva itself. Now, the Geneva Bay Estate sits on the former site of a lavish estate known as the Butternut.
May mga
massive
yate
three-story
sila.
estate that would have taken up the same area as Pier 32, 30, and 34, those first 3 homes in the subdivision. The Butternuts was built in 1874. Magnificent home out here on the point, built for Nathaniel Kellogg Fairbanks. He was in the soap business at the time in Chicago. Now, the Fairbanks, though, they weren't very lucky because their home was finished in the fall of 1874. Just a couple months later, their home was actually struck by lightning. Nobody was living at the home at the time besides a handful of servants that were left behind to kind of keep out the home throughout the winter. Luckily, those servants managed to save a number of things throughout the homes. Staircases,
Nice.
mantelpieces, wood trim, all those beautifully handcrafted pieces. But most importantly, they actually saved the blueprints to the estate. So what they did is they just rebuilt the home that following spring from those original plans, and it stood here for the next 80 years until 1955, when you guessed it, bought by another developer and subdivided.
Ngayon may
The
mga
first part of the tour is
nagpe-fishing din.
pretty excited to look at. You get out on the lake, you look at these beautiful homes, but a lot of the historic homes in this part of the lake are no longer there. Developers realized that they bought one of these smaller properties, broke it up, they could make a lot more money. And because the Geneva Bay area was the first part of the lake to be developed, it was the first part of the lake to also be turned over. As we leave the Geneva Bay area, just a few minutes here, we'll hit what's known as the Gold Coast. A lot of these homes were left over from that golden era between 1870 and 1920. So Pier 44 here, you can see a brand new home going up. There's about 1,200 properties here in the lake. There's no vacant lots. So if you want to build your own dream home, you have to buy somebody else's, tear it down and build your own home in its place. Start with Pier 45 though, so the next home with the red roof. This is the beginning of what we know as that Gold Coast. Again, these homes are left over from that 1870 to 1920 kind of heyday, when the lake really blossomed into what we see today. This old mansion with the red roof is known as Blacktop, built back in 1881, so much older than any of the homes we've seen so far. This was built for John Lester, one of the founding members of the Chicago Board of Trade. Now this home was very typical of the style and features of those late 1800s homes. Obviously no air conditioning at the time, so the only way to cool down your lake home was basically put as many windows facing in every which direction, huge screened-in front porch wrapping around the house. That way that cool lake breeze could kind of run throughout your home and cool it down during the summertime. Now just after that, we're going to get into the very famous Wrigley Estates out here on the lake. The Wrigley family did not just have one large mansion like a lot of people believe. That's a pretty common myth around here. The Wrigleys actually owned 7 different properties throughout the years, an entire mile stretch of shoreline. The first old home that we'll see that was owned by the Wrigleys is behind Pier 46 up on the hillside, the white home with green trim. It's known as North Woodside, built back in 1876 for Henry Strong. He was president
1876
of
si
the
Henry
Santa
Strong
Fe
daw.
Railroad at the time. Later years, it was owned by Olaf
Rest
Nelson
house.
T. Vander, who is an inventor credited with one very successful invention known as the sanitary milk bottle cap. This little cardboard disc stayed atop the old glass milk bottles allowed Mr. T. Vander to retire here at the lake at the ripe old age of 26 as a multi-millionaire. It was after Mr. T. Vander's death that the Wrigleys finally came in and purchased the property. They didn't even want to live in the home. They just bought it to preserve it because they heard there was plans to tear it down, build a subdivision in its place. They held on to it for a few years and passed it on to some new owners who promised not to tear it down, and it's been in that family's hands ever since. The new family also built this second home just next door, another white home with green trim, just before the tree line. That's about 30 or 40 years old now.
40 years old din.
Now my favorite of the former Wrigley estates is this round home right here. This is known as Hillcroft. Hillcroft actually began way back in the 1880s as a hunting and fishing lodge. From 1927 until 1977, this served as the Wrigley summer house and later as their guest house. When the home was sold off in 1981 though, the home was actually tore down. So this is not the original Hillcroft Lodge.
Yeah.
The new home is very similar in style to the original home, but it's only 1/3 of the
Mga
original
sikat pala
size.
na mga ano
Another fun
dito.
fact about this Hillcroft estate,
Tao.
Hillcroft
Kaya-
was actually sold back in 2018, I believe it was, for
Yan yung bahay ni
$11.25 million.
Summer
About
house.
11 and a quarter. At $11.25 million, it was the most expensive single-family home ever sold in the state of Wisconsin at the time. So just a little bit further up ahead, we'll talk about a home that has well surpassed that since then. This green home right here, this is Green Gables. This is the main residence of a guy named Philip Knight, or P.K. Wrigley, when he passed away in 1977. The home itself was built in 1966 and was considered state-of-the-art, as everything from the flagpole to the draperies were controlled electronically. Now again, PK, or Philip Knight Wrigley, he was kind of the one running all the businesses at the time. His father, William Wrigley Jr., was the one that started the Wrigley Chewing Gum Company. That's where a lot of that Wrigley fortune actually stemmed from. We'll talk more about William Wrigley Jr. later on in the trip. It is about 15 to 20 years old now. This is not a home though, it's actually just a pool and bathhouse. So they use this just for family gatherings.